Hello everyone and welcome to another MTG Top 10. I'm Neat Sahone and each and every Friday I bring you a new MTG Top 10 list. This week we're looking at a polarizing kind of card, Counterspells. Blue players love counter magic and it enables a lot of control strategies to exist. In this video I'm going to delve into the archives of competitive tournament play and come up with the 10 cards that have done the best at Pro Tours and Grand Prix. These cards are quite powerful and have seen a lot of play. When I did the research for this video, I was surprised to see how much some of these cards were played. I knew they were good, but they are super good, with the average score of the cards on this list being the highest in any MTG Top 10 ever by a fairly wide margin, even beating out broader topics like Top 10 Artifacts or Top 10 Planeswalkers. And the number one card on this list set a new record for the highest score any card on an MTG Top 10 has ever received. Every single card on this list has more than 100 points, not something that has ever happened before, and every single card on this list is still active today, and by active I mean that they have all added to their score in 2017. I'm pretty sure I've never ever had a list with so many cards that are still seeing play. Most of them have seen play every single year since they've been printed too, so complaints from players that Counterspells are too powerful may have a little bit of truth to them, since this is the most powerful MTG Top 10 I've ever done. Before we get started, a quick reminder on how I score cards on this list. Cards receive points depending on how many Grand Prix or Pro Tour Top 8s they have received, with a Pro Tour Top 8 worth twice as much as a Grand Prix Top 8. The cards on this list are then numbered 10 through 1, with 1 having the highest score. I also count Legacy and Vintage Championship events as Pro Tour Top 8 so that those formats can be shown in the score of the cards, and in this video it's probably more important than it's ever been in one of these videos because basically all of these cards, maybe that's hyperbolic, a lot of the cards in this video have seen play in Legacy and Vintage. At number 10 we have Daze. Counterspells are bad enough, but at least if your opponent has the mana up for one, you know it is coming, maybe, and you can play around it. Daze can potentially be free though, which causes you to throw all of that out the window. Daze is a very powerful card, and something of a fixed force of will. Instead of being a hard counter, people can pay 1 to ignore the counter, but the trade-off is that you can also play Daze for free with just Daze in your hand. You can't do that with force of will. It picked up 1 Pro Tour Top 8 at the Block Pro Tour for Mercadian Masks block, and it saw some play in Standard 2, and 3 different blue control decks that Top 8'd in 2000. It saw some play in Extended 2, mainly in Super Grow and Blue-Green Madness. Daze really took off in Eternal formats though, especially in Legacy where it is more or less a staple and it has picked up the bulk of its top 8s thanks to the fact that it is yet another free counterspell in a format that already has several of them, which in general makes blue decks very strong in Legacy, with the majority of decks playing the color. It even sees some play in Vintage. Thank God they don't print free counter magic anymore. At number 9 I have Spell Snare. It can only counter spells with a converted mana cost of 2, but 2 mana is one of the most common costs for a spell in constructed formats. You also always get to trade up with it as your opponent is paying 2 mana and you are only paying 1. Because of all this, despite seeming rather narrow, Spell Snare has seen a ton of play in every single competitive format Magic has to offer. It picked up 1 Pro Tour Top 8 in Block in a control deck, had 2 Top 8s at Worlds in 2006 in Standard and Blue-White Tron decks, and when Extended was around it saw play in Psychotog, Scepter Chant, Fairies, and Tezzerator. In Modern, it has seen the most play. It is capable of dealing with some of the most common and powerful spells in the format, such as Arcbound Ravager, Tarmogoyf, Remand, Dark Confidant. It has seen play since Modern began, appearing in all manner of decks with blue in them, including Delver, Fairies, Cobblade, and various control decks, as well as Splinter Twin decks before they got banned. More recently, it's been seeing play in Grixis and Blue Moon. In Legacy, it has seen play in Miracles, Canadian Threshold, Landstill, Show and Tell, and, well, most decks that have blue in them. It even has a couple of Vintage Championship Top 8s, and it doesn't figure to stop putting up points anytime soon, already having 5 so far in 2017. At number 8 we have Remand. This counterspell may not seem as powerful as some of them on this list. This is because it doesn't put spells in the graveyard after they are countered. However, it turns out adding a card draw effect to a 2-mana counterspell is pretty nuts, even if the spell you counter isn't gone forever. While it never saw play in Vintage or Legacy, it has managed top 8s in every other format. In Block, it put up 4 top 8s at Pro Tour Charleston in 2006, all in control decks as you might imagine. In Standard, Remand saw some play too. It had a very impressive year in 06 especially, putting up 4 top 8s at Pro Tour Honolulu and 5 top 8s at Worlds that same year. One of the decks that featured Remand is one of the more interesting decks to do well in Standard. It was called Owling Mind and was a control deck that ran multiple symmetrical card draw effects, like Howling Mind, and bounce spells alongside Ebony Owl Netsuke, with the plan being that you always wanted your opponent to have too many cards in their hand so you could kill them with the owl. This deck turned Remand's supposed downside into upside, since putting spells back in your opponent's hand was better than in the graveyard for this particular deck. Remand has been a staple in Modern too, and right now is perhaps the most played counterspell in the format. It has seen play in many of the same decks Spell Snare has seen play in Modern. Splinter Twin, Fairies, Delver, Cobblade, and Blue Moon. So far in 2017, it has added 2 points to its score, and it will very likely continue to add more. At number 7, we have the card that started it all, the card that is the great-grandfather of every card on this list, Counterspell. Originally printed in Alpha, it has been reprinted several times, and thus has had multiple shots at Standard and Block. It hasn't been reprinted in a long time, though, so long that it isn't even legal in Modern. Wizards has since concluded that 2-mana hard counters are too good for Standard. Counterspell is very efficient. While it isn't free like Daze or Force of Will, 2 mana to counter anything is great, especially when you're countering big spells. In Block, it put up 3 Pro Tour top 8s, one in 1996 and 2 more in 2000, 2 different Block formats. It saw a fair bit of play in Standard in multiple formats, managing top 8s back in 1996 and 97 in blue-white control decks, in 2000 and 2001 in Counter Rebel, Opposition, and Merfolk, and in 2002 in Psychotog. It has the most points in an extinct format, though, Extended, where it could be found in Mermaids, High Tide, Oath of Druids, and Countertop. Legacy is the format it still sees play in today. It saw a ton of play in Miracles before Top got banned, but more recently has found its way into non-Miracle control decks as well as Stoneblade. At number 6, we have Cryptic Command. Modal cards are pretty good. Modal counterspells are insane. This can do a ton of work. Any 2 modes on the card is certainly worth 4 mana. The card is probably casted as a counterspell the largest percentage of the time, either coupled with the bounce effect or the draw effect, but obviously any combination is a possibility with this card. Its power was clear even in the Block format, where it put up tons of Grand Prix top 8s, primarily in Fairies. In Standard, it did pretty much the same thing, Fairies being its most common home, but it also saw play in all manner of blue decks, including Makeshift Mannequin Reanimation decks, Pickles, and Merfolk. Furies were also good in Extended, which meant Cryptic Command saw play there as well, and also in various blue-based control decks like Tezzerator. It has seen the most play in Modern, once again in Fairies, as well as in Delver, Cobblade, Scapeshift, Splinter Twin, and most recently in Blue Moon. At number 5, we have Spell Pierce, a counterspell that seems super conditional. It can only counter non-creatures, and if your opponent has 2 to pay, it doesn't do anything. However, its efficiency is about as good as you can do, especially in formats like Standard and Modern, where cheaper counter magic is not really printed or allowed anymore. It even sees play in Legacy and Vintage, despite the fact that free counter magic exists there, indicating that this card is very powerful in any format. Because of its specialized nature, it is a sideboard card a decent amount of the time, but it has also seen a lot of mainboard play. In Standard, it saw play in a lot of control decks like Blue-Black, Blue-White, and Bug. It also found its way into Cobblade. In Modern, it saw play in Splinter Twin, like basically all of the modern legal counterspells on this list, and the various incarnations of Delver. Same thing. It is also a common sideboard card in Affinity and Infect decks. So far in 2017, Spell Pierce has already added 8 points to its score, so it is not slowing down anytime soon. At number 4, we have another card that seems narrow, but is the model of efficiency, Dispel. 1 mana to counter something is great, even if it is only 1 card type. This card has been in Standard 3 times, including very recently, indicating that Wizards likes having this card in Standard. While they don't like cheap counterspells that can counter anything, cheap ones that target a narrower subset of cards seem to be fine, and I think we'll continue to see those in Standard. Most removal happens to be instant speed, and so are all counterspells, so Dispel is going to have a lot of targets. Dispel has been in more sideboards than mainboards, unlike Spell Pierce, which saw more play in mainboards than in sideboards, but it has been a sideboard staple for blue decks anytime it has been in Standard, and also sees a ton of play in Modern, and a little in Legacy as well, and all this combines to make it a very legitimate number 4 on this list. It first saw play in Block at Pro Tour's Dragon's Maze. This was a block dominated by control decks, and as a result, Dispel put up 5 top 8s at the event. Its multiple printings have allowed it 3 separate runs through Standard, and had top 8s in Bant Control, Blue-White Flash, Cobblade, and Devotion to Blue. Its second time through Standard, it saw a big boost in how much it was played, and this is in part, at least, because of Collected Company, one of the most dominant cards of Standard for a while, and Dispel could deal with it easily. Some Collected Company decks even ran Dispel in their sideboard as a way of combating the mirror. More recently, it has found its way into Aetherworks Marvel and Copycat decks. Both of those have been banned, though. It sees play in Modern too, as a sideboard card in decks like Scapeshift and Infect, where Dispel can protect the combo, but also in control decks like the various Delver decks and Nahiri Control. Of all the cards on this list, Dispel has the best 2017, having gained 31 points so far. It seems likely it continues to find its way into decks, despite the fact that 2 of the decks that saw a lot of play have been banned, and it still has a little bit of time left in Standard. At number 3, we have Mana Leak, another counterspell that has seen a ton of reprints. Wizards seems to view Mana Leak as a little bit too good too, though not quite on the level of Counterspell, because they haven't reprinted it since 2012. Unlike Counterspell, though, it is legal in Modern. Thanks to all of its reprints, Mana Leak has managed more than 100 points in Standard alone, first seeing play there in 1998. It has been a staple in blue decks when it is printed in Standard, seeing play in decks like Mono Blue Control, Owling Mind alongside Remand, Blue White Tron, Blue White Control, Bug Control, Blue Black Control, and Delver over the years. In Extended, it managed a pretty good score of 47 points, finding its way into Oath of Druids, Psychotog, and Fairies over the years. Right now, it still sees play in Modern, primarily in control decks like Blue White and Blue Moon. In the past, it was in Splinter, Twin, and Delver decks. At number 2, we have the card that is probably the most powerful counterspell of all time, Force of Will. Like our number 10 Days, Force of Will can be cast for free. You just have to pay 1 life and pitch another blue card in your hand to do it, and it's a hard counter, unlike Days. That's a pretty reasonable cost for a hard counter. Force of Will has been a staple in every format it has ever been legal in, and has been a major reason why Blue is so powerful in Eternal formats. Blue is so ubiquitous in Eternal formats, partly because of Force of Will. That Force of Will happens to appear in more decks than it doesn't appear in. Despite how good it is today, Force of Will actually did not see a lot of play when it was in Blocker Standard. It managed 1 Pro Tour Top 8 at Pro Tour Columbus in 1996, a Block Pro Tour, and 3 Top 8s at Worlds in 1997. Extended is where it first began to see a ton of play, though, putting up 3 Top 8s at Pro Tour Chicago in 97, and 3 more at Pro Tour Rome in 98. These were in decks like Merfolk, High Tide, and Control decks. It also found its way into Oath of Druids and Mono Blue Control near the end of its run in Standard. With regard to Legacy and Vintage, there is no reason for me to spend a ton of time telling you every kind of deck it has been in. It has been in a lot of them, with the highlights being decks like Miracles, Countertop, Sneak and Show, and Delver. Force of Will may be the most powerful counterspell in the game, but it doesn't get the highest score of the cards on this list, and I think you'll be surprised by what comes in at number 1. It is Negate, with almost 400 points. Negate has been reprinted a ton of times. With its first printing in Morningtide, it has been reprinted in Standard legal sets 9 times since then, and any time it is in Standard it sees play, and it seems to be another card that Wizards like to have in Standard. I think it's a card we're likely to see reprinted again, and because of that it's going to have a constant impact on Magic Standard formats. Similar to Dispel, Negate is narrow, but the trade-off for that narrowness is that it is efficient. Anytime it is in Standard, it is one of the most efficient counterspells around, so it manages to see a lot of play. All that said, while Standard is where it has seen the most points, Negate is by no means limited to that format, managing to find its way to top 8s in Legacy, Extended, and Modern as well. While frequently a sideboard card, it has also seen some mainboard play. This is because most decks run enough non-creature spells for at least some number of the cards to be worth it in your mainboard. Recently is when we've seen it in mainboards the most, basically in the current Standard format. Over the years in Standard, it has seen play in a plethora of decks, putting up the most good finishes in Fairies, Cobblade, Delver, Blue-Black Control, Devotion to Blue, and most recently, Aetherworks Marvel, before it got banned. Negate was a card that was good against Marvel too, but since it has been banned, it might be a little less played now. It also sees play in Modern until this very day. Right now, it can be found in Bant Company and Scapeshift. In the past, it was in Merfolk and Splinter Twin. Well, that does it for this week's MTG Top 10. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button. In the comments, let me know what counterspell is your favorite, and if you want to make sure you catch more of my MTG Top 10s, don't forget to subscribe. My Top 10s are sponsored by 5colorcombo.com, a great website for all things Magic. They have a store with a lot of sweet original art playmats and tokens, and you can use my discount code NITSAHONE5 there to get a 5% discount. Thanks for watching.